Welcome to Frame Contemporary Art Finland's Rehearsing Hospitalities public program on 2021 spring. The program is started 2019 and runs until 2023. And the purpose of the program is to look into different ways of rehearsing hospitalities within the arts and how to practice hospitality within the art scene. And we have been programming this in different forms: online events, performances, podcasts, and publications. We have co-curated this edition with the digital culture and collaborative art agency MCult and anti-racist and queer feminist project Museum of Impossible Forms. The program started 2019 by exploring hospitality towards diverse knowledges and ways of knowing. And since 2020, we have extended these questions towards access since it became transparent that the knowledge and the access to knowledge are deeply interconnected. So it becomes also very obvious that it's impossible to speak about different ways of knowing without addressing who as individuals or communities has the access and can access different ways of knowing and knowledges within the society, and also the spaces and situations where those knowledges are produced.
In the first year, we learnt on sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos's concept of ecologies of knowledge to ask how contemporary art might become more hospitable towards diverse and interconnected knowledges. And we continued working with this throughout 2020 and into 2021 as we turned towards how to become more hospitable to forms and questions of access and accessibility. And developing this idea of ecologies of knowledge led to thinking about ecologies of access and how to create a programme which might materially and conceptually work with issues of access. So presenting diverse approaches to access and across different registers of access. And a guiding question of the programme has really been, how can diverse access to language or environment, culture and archives produce more equal and just contemporary societies?
When I first began considering hospitality and what that would mean to me as a curator and to Museum of Impossible Forms, the question quite quickly became about these considerations of access and accessibility in public spaces, and how that could kind of lead into deeper considerations about marginalization and kind of disability in society in relation to public spaces. And eventually we started focusing more on the concept of water, particularly around the notion of how culture in Helsinki and also Finland itself has been kind of marketed around these kind of beautiful waters and kind of access to water, but how water in itself holds many problems in terms of access. Water is far from accessible when you think about it in terms that swimming and being able to move in water requires a degree of able-bodiedness. We kind of started using water as this medium to connect and communicate this type of allegory of access and essential rights. So this water was for us a type of starting point in our thinking.
Yes, water is a commons, and this perspective of commons is something that we share, both MIF and MCult. So MCult works in this tradition, this participatory tradition of media art, where practice is based on notions of commons and open access, collaboration and sharing. And these notions are also at the heart of our project Central Park Archives, which builds analogies between the commons of land and information. And globally, both of these and all types of commons are actually environments under threat, and they need to be protected. So when thinking of the Central Park archives, let's consider the Finnish everyman's rights. It's a very hospitable practice, which also applies to the Central Park. You can roam freely there and even forage for berries or mushrooms. But then access to the future of the park, how it's developed and how its ecosystems are protected, that's a more complex and contested issue. So by asking access to what, we start to open the concept of access towards questions of rights and ultimately the agencies produced.
During the process of developing the program, we were discussing many aspects of access on how to enter kind of common and cultural and public space in society. What has been very important in the earlier programming at Rehearsing Hospitalities program is to understand that every individual and community is situated in some kind of cultural and social, political and bodily history and a specific position. And this affects on how we collaborate, share things and ideas, how we enter into public space of knowing and public realm in broader sense. This somehow became even more evident while we were researching discourses around concept of epistemology that comes from the disability theory. This discourse looks on how individuals and communities who are marginalized because of disability and illness produce and exchange knowledge.
And this organic and slow process of discussions and building of a conceptual network concretized and formalized itself between Frame, MCult, and Museum of Impossible Forms as three organizations seeking to explore ideas of ecology and access in different capacities. The idea was that we would work through independent methodologies and yet could disentangle these concepts together through a common program. For the Museum of Impossible Forms, ecologies and access mean to first identify a space of power and how it is created, and how power functions and malfunctions. In our working, we turn towards the mermaid as a protagonist and mermaiding as a form of recreation, and how it is an activity that is promoted as escapist, recreational, and joyful, and yet remains located within a matrix of capitalist normativity, ableism, and often patriarchal misogyny.
As a form of gathering and further discussion, together with artists Iida, Nissinen, and the Museum of Impossible Forms Working Group, we started to go further in the issues of water and public swimming pools. And that was really how the Mer-personing project was born. And Mer-personing looks at hospitality and accessibility in relation to public swimming pools. And the mermaiding is type of a starting point to also go into further societal issues to discuss gender and access in public spaces, and how kind of the whole concept of hospitality eventually brings up these notions of structures and making structures more accessible.
COVID-19 also brought a sudden meta level to the program in making. Questions of access, restrictions, health risks, and shared ethics somehow surfaced more intimately also for those of us with ableist privileges. And while the situation forced us to radically reformulate, cancel, and postpone some parts of the program, I also think it pushed some critical conversations beyond the point where they were in the pre-COVID reality.
The dimension of care has been very tangible throughout this pandemic production. The Central Park, for example, was populated with distant citizens and it provided us with a safe environment to engage in dialogue with participants. And in planning the archive project, we were inspired by Annette Decker's observation of so-called networks of care. It's a perspective to reframe the process of archiving as a collaborative activity, a commoning. We already had identified similar networks in the Central Park. Besides the citywide activist movement to protect urban forests, there are the allotment gardeners, the stream caretakers, the friends of deer and flying squirrels.
My perspective to these matters is rather concrete. I worked in the field with participants in 2 of the projects that are a part of the program. And the pandemic set really special challenges to both of these participatory projects, as we needed to find ways of on-site involvement that would take into account and also minimize the risks of coming together in the shared physical space.
Structured parallels in the methodological approaches, for example, questions of a more than human and a post-human existence, run through the entire program. What connects these various projects and the overall program of Gathering for Rehearsing Hospitalities 2021 is also a subdermal idea of what does it mean to be human, or as Sylvia Winter writes, and I quote, the present ethnoclass, that is the Western bourgeois conception of the human, man, which overrepresents itself as if it were the human itself. End of quote. The fact that this white, hetero-cis, able-bodied male idea of the human is directly challenged within the core and the spectrum of the entire Gathering for Rehearsing Hospitalities program is a testament to how the questions of ecology and access are to be framed and answered.
Also re-emerging and embedded in the programme is a strong sense of place, site, locality. Some projects are very situated in physical places, working with specific locations and communities in Helsinki, whilst others deal with access and knowledge that's located in the body or in institutional spaces. Something the event knowing within the limits specifically opens up. And moving from events in physical spaces to hosting and gathering online does create some limitations, but at the same time, the programme's attention to issues of access and accessibility could not be more timely, since the pandemic has made really explicit that culture needs to be made accessible for all. Something that certainly the disability justice movement and people living in remote locations have been calling for a long, long time. And with this in mind, in spring 2021, we've been careful to configure a gathering that has various points of access for engagement, from local installations to online presentations and conversations. And there's also contributions which come in the form of audio and visual works, such as Subserotic Bulge by Fliss Holland and Silver Epoch by collaborative duo Betsy, and also a publication called Access Riders by Jussi and Yamina Lindholm.
The 2 projects I am most involved in, the Central Park Archives and the Rehearsing, are of very different yet partly entangled matters. Central Park Archives comprises public commons, communal archiving, local knowledges and political struggles of a shared cityscape. And Rehearsing in turn also touches the politics of public spaces, but it goes into the direction of politics of water as well, popular myths, and it is also about fantasy, play, and fiction of the body.
The pandemic really caused a lot of problems in terms of making it possible to realize projects in public spaces, particularly in swimming pools, but in a way it also partly highlighted these also general problems with access in relation to the swimming pools, particularly in terms of be able to host, for example, private lessons in that type of space. But we were lucky that in the end we were able to have armor piercing workshop, and on the basis of which we produced documentation, which comprises of a film and other documentational material that forms a basis of a mer person archive, if you will. And we're hoping that this will also be like a starting point to, for one, make mer personing more visible, and also question these kind of stereotypical notions of what is a mermaid or what is mermaiding, or the possibilities of what that can be. And hopefully it will also make visible the kind of different problems in terms of accessibility in relation to public swimming pools, and also how to make swimming as a sport more accessible to different groups of people.
During our dialogues in the Central Park, we came to understand how access and agency are encoded in invisible territories of exclusion and inclusion, and various forms of visual representation. For example, the pixel unit of Helsinki's General Plan 2050, it's a classic view from nowhere that gave rise to large protests by citizens who lined the pixel boundaries of the park with their own bodies. And in the installation at Maunola House this May, for us, it's an opportunity to present a set of first recordings and collections of the archive, including careful observations of flora and fauna mixed with planning cartographies and activist struggles, conversations on park commons, biopolitics, and networks of care.
Within all the projects, there is an exploration of how the concept of knowledge is fortified through multiple iterations and institutionalized as politics of knowledge, knowledge economies, and power-knowledge relations as a productive force for biopolitical expansion. Within all the projects is an investigation towards finding the potential to be able to disrupt and intervene into the logics of what counts as knowledge.